Welcome to the Jewish Study Center. I'm Jerry Garfinkel. I'm the treasurer of the Jewish Study Center. And as such, I give a pitch for donations. Our classes are free, but we do have expenses. And so we encourage people to donate. We don't mandate it. We don't say exactly what to give. But if you want to donate, we will appreciate that. If you want to donate, the best thing is to go to our website, www.jewishstudycenter.org, and you can click on donate, and then you can donate from your PayPal account or with your credit card or with a check. If you if you indicate that you'll be paid by check, the website will tell you where to send your check. Okay, that's my treasury stuff. Now, a few technical points. As you are probably aware, this is being recorded. After the class is over, the recording will be posted on YouTube, and I will send an email to all the registered students and where the recording is. Also, I guess I have to make one more change now. Everybody is muted, and it's not allowed to be unmuted. But we do want your questions and your comments. You can't help because you're muted, but please write your questions or your comments in the chat box and address them to everybody. Sometimes you might ask a question, someone else will answer you. So it's better to address it to everybody. And also, by the way, the closed captions are on. So if you can't understand my weird accent or Howard or Aharon, you can just look at the closed captions. You can also look at the transcript if you want. Okay, we have a wonderful program today, and we're doing things a little bit differently. It'll be introduced by Howard Mortman. Howard is a board member of the Study Center, and he's also the communications director for C-SPAN. And he's done a lot of work with the Study Center. He's actually hosted many of our Latka Hamantashen debates. He's a great fellow. So Howard, it's all yours right now.
Right. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, everybody, for attending. One quick personal note. Jerry mentioned I'm on the board of the Jewish Study Center. This actually is my maiden voyage in bringing in a speaker, bringing in a guest, and I couldn't be more thrilled than someone who's really important to me, and I think it's just done a wealth of good for Jewish learning and education in our community. So thank you. A quick run of show. I'm going to introduce our guest, Aharon, and then I want to turn it over to him. He's going to explain the project. He's going to share a presentation, and the floor will be his for the duration. Coming out of it, when he's over, I will come in with just a couple questions. But then, as Jerry mentioned, want to get to the questions that you have as quick as possible and as many as we can get. Roughly half an hour for the presentation, perhaps 45 minutes for the presentation, and we have an end time of 8:15 Eastern time. We may end earlier, may end a little later, but that's the target. So I'm going to introduce Aharon and get right to it because I'm beyond words excited to have him join us. Aharon Varady is a pioneer in open source Judaism and the founding director of the Open Siddur Project. The Open Siddur Project was conceived in 2001 while Aharon was working as a junior IT system administrator at a small web hosting company in Philadelphia, DataRealm. While he was searching for work as a planner in late 2008, the vision for the Open Siddur that he had written back then was discovered by some other interested people online. In the summer of 2009, the project was officially launched by an international Jewish startup incubator based in Jerusalem called Present Tense. While he is the founding director of the project, he thinks of himself more as a caretaker or shamish, who serves in multiple roles, including as a volunteer contributor among the many other contributors of liturgical and prayer-related content shared through the project. Part of the Aharon Varady story is connecting his focus on Jewish prayer and liturgical resources with his professional background as a community planner. As a planner, he is interested in parks, trails, and the physical commons on which healthy communities and ecosystems depend. As a Jewish professional, he is concerned with the creative intellectual commons that is the reservoir of a vital and vibrant Jewish culture. Here's Aharon's educational background: undergraduate studies, history at SUNY Binghamton, 1996, with minors in geology and Judaic studies, graduate studies, classwork in library and information science at Drexel University in Philadelphia, and a master's degree in community planning at the University of Cincinnati's School of Planning, plus a master's degree in Jewish education from the Jewish Theological Seminary in 2013. After working at the Trust for Public Land Center for City Park Excellence and the Urban Institute's International Development Program, 2004 to 2005, he worked in southwestern and central Louisiana on planning projects related to Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Rita's impact. While there, he was introduced to Southern Jewish communities and did a stint as an interim director of Hillel at LSU. In 2012, Aharon's work on open source Judaism was featured in Atlantic Magazine. In 2024, he was a research fellow at the American Jewish Archives in Cincinnati, where he lives and does most of his work, and joins us tonight. Now, before I get to Aharon, and it's going to be his in a moment, one really quick personal note. I came across Aharon's work during doing personal research into rabbi prayers in public and political settings like Congress, conventions, inaugurations. What he's going to talk about, oh, I'm sorry, my use of his work is just a sliver of what he offers. But for me, his work continues to be indispensable, and I use his research constantly. He's an amazing gift to the American Jewish community and helps tell our story in a unique and valuable way. So please welcome to the Jewish Study Center, Aharon Varady, founding director of the Open Siddur Project.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you, Jerry. I'm super happy to be here with, it looks like 20 or so folks. And I don't do this terribly often. I'm usually behind the scenes. I'm a writer. But I'll get into the spirit just right quick. I have a presentation here to keep me on tracks and keep rambling to a minimum. Although I will be speaking extemporaneously until I guess it gets to be more of a me story a little bit later. And then I'll be fully off of the presentation mode at the end. I'm going to share the screen and we'll just jump right into it. And I will, there it is. Share. And can everybody see that? Excellent.
Yes, well, I can see it at least.
Okay, great. So no technical errors yet. The project which I helped to found, okay, I conceived it, I founded it, but there are other people involved with it, so I don't want to take full credit. It's called the Open Siddur Project, or Open Siddur for short. And the tagline we have for it, which I hope embodies the entire spirit of the project, is it's a community-grown Libra open access archive of Jewish prayer and liturgical resources for those crafting and sharing the content of their practice. So for sure, other people can come and use the Open Siddur Project, and they do. Some people come and find out about Judaism by looking at Jewish prayer literature. But the reason why the project was founded wasn't as a missionary or a kiruv organization or anything like that. It was very specifically created by people who love Jewish prayer, have written prayers, or want to work with prayers in making their own prayer books. That could be for themselves, their families, or their communities. I think I also added here, and I'll have these again at the end, just some helpful links if somebody wanted to go and visit some of these sites or start participating in a discussion. I would only add to it that if you find any of this interesting and want to contact me directly, just feel free. I really just always want to make a more personal connection with folks. So what's the agenda tonight? I'm going to describe what the Open Siddur Project is with a little bit more detail, why I founded the project, how the project was founded, how to access the project, and how to contribute to the project. So most of these slides are going to be like on the first, what is the Open Siddur Project, and then a few more slides closer to the end on how to contribute. First, some background, and this is really to emphasize that although I'm speaking to you now, and whatever my online presence is and connection to the project, I really want to emphasize this is an international project with a lot of people involved. Some people are only involved once and then they disappear. Some people remain involved for 10 years and then they pass away. Other people have remained participating and contributing from the beginning to the present day, and other people just started participating with a lot of fervor and excitement about a month ago. It's a completely volunteer-driven project. In a way, I don't take a salary for the project, but I am the closest thing to a full-time worker on the project. The money I make is related to the project. I do freelance gigs doing design of books and other kind of graphic work on Jewish related things. And I also do research. My name is spread by people who want to do research but can't make it to Cincinnati, and I help them do research at the local CLOW. And I guess I'm good for other things too, but that's mostly most of the work that I've been getting lately. The project itself is nonprofit. We are not ourselves a state or federally recognized nonprofit. Rather, we're officially a project of a nonprofit which acts as our fiscal sponsor. So if somebody wanted to make a tax-deductible donation, they would make it through an organization called Jewish Creativity International. And Jewish Creativity International would take that money for us into an account. And then we basically send our receipts to Jewish Creativity International, and they help pay for things like when we need a new book scanner or a new laptop, or if we're attending a conference and we need to send our receipts for that. It's a completely non-commercial project. Nobody's making any money from this. Our entire interest in this is to benefit people who may be related to the project, but are probably not. And it's something I didn't write a pointer here. It's we're really doing this for the future, for people. Maybe this project is going to disappear at some point, maybe in my lifetime, maybe afterwards. Hopefully it'll survive. But the work itself will continue on and it'll be future-proof. It'll be in a technological standard and preserved in a way that other people can continue to make use of it after we're gone. It's the project is non-denominational. I don't recognize myself according to any official denomination. Other people in the project do, and that's all right. Maybe we could call it trans-denominational or pan-denominational or pre or post-denominational. It's, as far as I'm concerned, it's jargon because we're Jews, and some people, in fact, who contribute to the project are not, but we're all working according to the mission established by the project over these past 15 years. It's not a prescriptive project. There's nothing about this project which is attempting to missionize to Jews or to non-Jews. We're not establishing a kind of vision of what Judaism is or should be. What any particular prayer speaks for in the project is the perspective of the person who wrote that prayer. And for many of the historic prayers, they're only known by what their historical context is. So as a resource, it's useful in its historical context, and we can't say too much about its author, except what it expresses, what it might express about the author and the period in which we might know something about when it was written. The project was conceived, as Howard said, back in 2001, and I launched it publicly in 2009, when it seemed to be getting a lot more traction than my career as a community planner when I was looking for work during the past recession, already 15 years ago. Feels like yesterday. So now there's 650 living contributors, and I'd add to that among the people with authors pages, or sometimes translator pages, there's about 750 people who have passed away, who are deceased. We give everybody who's touched the project that we've shared their work, everybody is given a kavod or an honor for their work. That's super important to our mission, that everybody is properly attributed. And that's important to us because we want the work that we share to make its way into people's prayer books or their curriculum in a class. And for that material, for that author, for whoever prepared that, whoever touched that material to get properly credited. It's not just a value in academia, it's a Jewish value, and it's one we take very seriously. Our goal: to provide text, tools, and resources shared under legal terms that permit adaptive, creative reuse. People, when they copy, paste, hopefully, work that they really enjoy and appreciate into their curriculum or their prayer book, or something to slip in their pocket while they're taking a hike that they want to use later in the day. However they want to use resources in the Open Siddur Project, we want them to be able to feel like they can reuse that, so long as they are properly crediting and attributing the work. We do this if I have any thing that I personally want to make sure that the project is supporting, it's really these values here. I want to empower personal autonomy. I want to preserve Jewish customs. I want to cross-pollinate wisdom that is reflected in Jewish prayer and Jewish prayer resources, liturgical readings, the full gamut. I want to make any innovation in Jewish spiritual practice to be relevant, adaptable, and open. I don't want such innovations to remain proprietary and the private ownership of any particular person or corporation for 100 years after it's been created. I want that material that they've innovated, I want, when people share it, for that to be part of Jewish culture, that people are suddenly available to work in, to improve or adapt or simply adopt. And I hope in this way I'll push back against some of the orientation in the last 100 years to make Jewish culture proprietary, to make Jewish culture a kind of commodity that people feel a sense of personal ownership as like an intellectual property that they can trade like chattel property. Our mission, if somebody's wondering exactly what the mission statement is here, I have it. To make the content of Jewish liturgy and prayer literature accessible for creative reuse, for prayer and study under legal terms that preserve proper and correct attribution. Now, if you're looking at this and you're saying, oh, is that like Wikipedia? Yes. The Open Siddur Project was founded or was conceived in the heady days where a lot of startup and tech projects were looking at Wikipedia as a proof of concept for internet collaboration. How can we work on an immensely large subject with all the people who might be interested for all the different reasons they might be interested, and make sure that their work remains in a form and under legal provisions that keep that work accessible and available for future collaboration. And so instead of keeping our scope for all of knowledge like Wikipedia is, ours is a little bit narrower, just all Jewish prayer literature. That's still fairly large. So here I'm going to talk about the scope. Jewish prayers, liturgies, and related work, historical and contemporary, familiar and obscure. So whatever you bring in your own mind to what Jewish prayer is, just accept for the moment, there might be more. There might be more to that. There might be more Jewish prayer literature than fits inside a Siddur you might have been handed to on Friday night, or that your Chavurah adopted as part of its Siddur committee, for sure. If we were to, right now, take all of the content that has been shared on the Open Siddur and create a printed book, I'm sure it would be far outside the limits of any on-demand printer. It would have to be a multi-volume set, and we're talking about 30 volumes already. We're coming close to 3,700 unique resources. That's individual prayers and individual liturgical readings, essays on prayer, and instructional texts for how to access states of awareness conducive for all kinds of methods of contemplation. These are both religious works and religious works intended for civic days or civic purposes, such as the things that Howard Warman has written about, like rabbinic guest chaplains beginning sessions of Congress, or really any civic meeting, as is fairly common in the United States for the last 150, let's say 175 years. This has been part of the bread and butter of rabbinic work, knowing that you're going to be tapped on the shoulder to start a meeting and to prepare a unique and custom prayer for that. Where are those prayers archived? Who's even thinking about that? That's something that is firmly within our scope and that we focus a great deal on. For the rabbis who are tasked with that, they really don't have any other resource to look at other comparative prayers other than to dial up the Open Siddur Project and see what a colleague might have written, or one of their teachers, or somebody else who might have written with a corresponding theme that they're interested in. Jews aren't only rabbinic Jews, they're also Karaite Jews. There are Black Hebrew Israelites. I place them in the adjacent communities category, along with Samaritans. There are all sorts of people who are interested in Jewish prayer, or prayer that is, for lack of a better word, contributed by fellow travelers. I think of certain Jewish communities, let me call them folks on the hinterlands, who later, by the time of the Holocaust, were non-Jewish communities who were Judaizing. In Hungary, there are the Zsekeli. There's a group called the Subotniks, and they're just folks who really were into Judaism, who they didn't convert initially, and they might not have originally been Christian groups, but by the time of the Holocaust, they became Christian groups. I'm sorry, they became Jewish groups. And the Open Siddur Project is really interested in what they contributed and what they do contribute that might be of interest to other Jews and fellow travelers in adjacent communities. So our scope, and the people who contribute to it. I think I actually did run through all of these. Here's a picture of retired Lieutenant Commander Arnold Resnikoff. Is Arnold actually here tonight? He's going to correct me, and I'm so sorry, Dr. Resnikoff, for mangling your honor, your honor and title. So please forgive me. Here he is providing a prayer back in the early 90s, when there was a Navy ship that was being at a Navy ship ceremony that involved the military of Israel, and the chief rabbi of Israel was in attendance. Some folks here might know of other chavarot besides Fabrengen that is in the DC area. The Hill Chavara contributed their machzor through the project several years ago. And there are a few people from Fabrengen who have also contributed works. Example of unfamiliar work, or this is work by David DeSolapool from Shari Shearit Israel in Manhattan, and they created a service for Thanksgiving Day, which they still use at Shearit Israel. In our project, works in the Cairo Geniza that exist as fragments, there are contributors who take those fragments and fill in the missing gaps, add pointed Hebrew or nikudot to the Hebrew. And on occasions where there are liturgical readings and not prayers, they'll even add cantillation. So some of these medieval liturgical readings can be chanted again. Here's a Samaritan work that was contributed to the project over a decade ago. This is called a defter, and we have a full English translation of this as well. The defter, the Samaritan community, Samaritans are an international community, but most members are in two communities in Israel, in Holon and also in the West Bank. I'm thrilled that Benjamin Tzedaka, who's an elder of that community, knows of this project and is a contributor to it. And we can expand the number of folks who see themselves as working in this mission together. From Benjamin Tzedaka's interest in the project, we're helping to make Samaritan culture more visible to Jews and Israelis who might not really appreciate or even know of Samaritan culture too well. when I talk about civic prayers, besides opening meetings, I'm thinking a great deal about the contributions of Mordechai Kaplan and the Reconstructionist movement. They weren't the first to create prayers for civic festivals like Thanksgiving Day, but for days like Martin Luther King Day, they were extremely innovative. And these sorts of ecumenical prayers find their home in the Open Siddur Project, and we're probably the only place other than a collected printed work of prayers in which anyone can find the largest anthology of prayers of all of these sorts. Our audience, really anyone working with the content of Jewish devotional practice, that's students and educators, publishers and Siddur crafters, rabbis, chaplains, and lay leaders, daveners, both private and communal. So add cantors to that, and scholars and researchers. And I'm thinking also of anthropologists, people who study Jewish culture and Jewish life ways, since we offer plenty of prayers and we're collecting plenty of prayers of both life ways that are recognized within the Jewish life cycle and also life ways that are new. For example, a prayer for a surrogate mother having a healthy pregnancy. I'm going to come off of the shared screen and maybe jump back on it so I can talk more about the history of the project and you can see my punim. Can everybody see me again? Great. So how did this project begin? And why did I start this project? This project came about in 2001. I said it was conceived. Now, I had been working as sort of a librarian and information science specialist while I was at Drexel University, and I ended up in this job. And we had like a day all for our own in order to figure out like some way to contribute to other open source projects. Our office, our web hosting company was officially an open source web hosting company. All of the code that we used could be recontributed to the technical community and adapted for their use, commercially or non-commercially. And we were for sure using software that had been contributed by that purpose by others. So we were already in a culture of benefiting by sharing. And so I was in a mindset then of what would Judaism look like if we also had an idea of sharing our creativity for each other's benefit. And I thought, well, not all Jews are really interested in creativity. Maybe they see creativity as a danger to cultural authenticity. Maybe they're afraid of openness and sharing because they're afraid of cultural appropriation by people who they don't want to touch or even look at that material. It's sacred, and the idea of somebody who might be a Jew hater actually like figuring out some way to use the Shema is anathema. And I thought about that a little bit, and I would have to say that in 20 years, I've never seen a Jew hater use the Open Siddur Project for anything untoward. What I have seen in 20 years, in 20 years since this project has been worked on, 16 years, I'm rounding up. In the 16 years since 2009, I've seen Jews contribute prayers that other Jews would disagree with vehemently. It's just the amazing thing about that distinguishes this project from other projects, since we're not denominationally affiliated, since each prayer is representative of the person who contributes it and their viewpoint, that we can say there's no blowback on a particular movement for the politics that they might be presenting if their prayer has any political sentiment. And there are prayers that have political sentiment. There are certainly, within the context that we know about today, in which people get very upset, there are prayers that were sympathetic to Palestinian children written in 2008, that back then, soon after the unilateral exit of Israel from the Gaza Strip, when that happened, there were already people were very upset that a prayer like that could be written, even though Hamas had control over the Gaza Strip, and they were experiencing, the Gazans and the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip were experiencing already a tremendous pushback then. And so nowadays, when somebody does a search and they find a prayer like that, they might wonder, who wrote that and what's their politics? Well, they can find out and they can see who the author was, and that they can add that to their dossier about that person. If somebody doesn't want to share that prayer and wants to keep it private, then they can keep it private. But as far as we're concerned in the project, this is an invaluable historic archive of the anxieties and concerns of Jewish people. We're certainly not monolithic, and prayer literature offers a very unusual and remarkable way in which Jews are expressing those anxieties and concerns. In 2001, I didn't necessarily think about the politics of other folks contributing material to the work. I was really thinking more about how there were certain cults in the world who were inventing, who had innovated interesting practices of meditation, or they had made their own system of yoga and they were trying to patent it. And I thought, well, we shouldn't do that among Jews. We shouldn't make those systems or instructional texts for how to meditate. We shouldn't keep those private. We should make those available to more and more teachers to be able to teach that. If there's something that might be relevant to somebody and it's inaccessible to Jews, we should ask whether that's unfairly inaccessible, if it's inaccessible due to obscurity, rather than it being effective and important. Let educators who are curators of what is important figure this out and have it available to them. And if there are people who want to come and translate it, let the material be online and available for translation and shareable. That was what I was thinking about. There was some litigious action at the time by a group that was doing yoga, and they had tried to sort of copyright their yoga practice, and then they went to court, and other people who were saying, no, yoga is 5,000 years old. You can't copyright it. If you copyright your yoga, you're endangering the whole transmission and lineage of yoga. So don't do that. It made me think about the first time I had tried to create a Siddur for students at LSU when I was the interim project director there. And I had tried to put together a Siddur, and it didn't stop me seeing a very explicit warning on the copyright page of the Art Scroll Siddur, which said, "Do not, we forbid you to make copies of this." Well, to make copies for that, for the specific use, as far as I was concerned, at LSU, this was the Siddur as intended. But it certainly was an extra legal act, and I hadn't founded the project yet. And the project's a lot more stringent about such rules now. We want this material, again, to be future-proof and accessible. We only want people who are intentional about sharing to be intentionally sharing that work. So we don't share things that have been, or that are currently, I should say, under copyright. It's only work that's been intentionally shared or work that's entered into the public domain because that copyright has expired. There are a few exceptions to that, and those exceptions are mainly where a prayer has been written in Hebrew, and the author really can't be contacted because they've died. This has occurred a few times where somebody has written a prayer. There's a prayer for giving medicine to somebody who's ill. And the woman who wrote that, she was killed in a terrorist attack. And we wanted to participate in making this prayer available to be translated into English. And we did, and we were able to do that. And we also wanted to find a way in which we could make some contact with the survivors in this woman's family. We were unable to, but this is the example I'll bring of one of the more unique impacts of our project is that we have an incredible cultural gap now internationally between Jews who live in the diaspora in different countries using different languages. And that includes Jews who speak English as their fluent language in prayer and in composing prayers, and Jews in Israel who are composing prayers in Hebrew. Our project is the rare cultural project which is providing a means by which prayers in Hebrew are being translated actively by volunteer contributors into English and vice versa. This is both prayers that are written by individuals unaffiliated and prayers that are written by movements. So, for example, the Masorti movement has had a relationship with our project. They've been writing prayers in Hebrew and we've been translating them. And also this has been the case in the Reform movement in Israel too. There's a few cases as well, I would say, in other countries, prayers of the chief rabbi of the United Hebrew Congregations in the UK, prayers of, during COVID, prayer of the office of the chief rabbi in Italy. And there's other examples of this. I think I had a few other reasons why I founded the project, but I'll leave those for further discussion in the question and answer, and move back to how to access the project. So I'm going to share the screen again. And I can say that we should be done by 7:50. So about 4 more minutes of me speaking over this, over these slides. If you wanted to contribute, let's see, is this? Yeah, if you wanted to contribute to the project, I'd say, think about how you've engaged with Jewish prayer. Whether like you felt touched about something that you didn't like, when you were praying alone or praying with other people, and it occurred to you, you had an insight of how you wanted to correct that, and you thought that that might be useful for others. Maybe you've shared that privately with others. Here's an opportunity to share that with more people. And through the Open Siddur Project, we can be a channel for that insight actually entering Jewish creative culture and Jewish prayer culture. And who knows where that insight will end up? My thinking is that the Torah that each of us has and that we reveal through our insight and practice is a treasure. It's the treasure that makes up cumulatively Jewish culture. So please share that and consider the Open Siddur Project as the place that you share that. If you've written a prayer or if you've translated a prayer yourself, consider sharing that. If you've learned how to type in Hebrew, or you're just able to type in Cyrillic or some other alphabet, and you have a prayer book with a translation or an original prayer that's in the public domain, one that we've shared or that we're intending to share, please share that transcription. If it's a work that you know that's in the public domain and that we don't have it in our list of works that we're sharing for collaborative transcription, let us know and we can put that on our wish list and make that accessible. Sometimes people do request works, or I stumble over works that are fairly rare and that aren't available online, and it requires additional research. Sometimes they are only available in one library in the world. That library is in Israel. It's at Bar Ilan's library, or it's at the National Library of Israel. Or sometimes we're really fortunate and that work is here in Cincinnati at the Clow Library. Let me know and find out. Occasionally, we make requests for people to be on the lookout and keep it on their radar. There's an unexpectedly rare work that we are trying to find. For example, in 1969, the conservative movement published a Sephardi Machzor for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. As far as we know, it's the only attempt the conservative movement made for a Nusach Sephardi Siddur for their Sephardi congregations, and it has a Spanish translation. The work published in Argentina is no longer under copyright in the United States, and it's a work that we would like to make more accessible. Unfortunately, the Machzor for Yom Kippur is, as far as we can tell, only available in two collections. One we would need to be in New York in order to access within a reading room. The other we would need to go to Jerusalem and access from the National Library of Israel. But perhaps it's in your synagogue's congregational library. So take a look. You get these requests by participating in our discussion group, and that's on Facebook. Our Facebook discussion group link is facebook.com/groups/Open Siddur. That link and others are available from our website, opensiddur.org. And our donations link, if you felt like this is a really worthy project, you can make a donation here. If you were wondering what people have donated in lieu of everything I've mentioned up to this point, I'd say the major donation that they've made is digital fonts. It's probably the most important bit of software that people have contributed and that the project has shared that isn't a prayer. It's something much more basic. It's simply the capability to render Hebrew text or text in other Jewish languages using Hebrew scripts. we don't only use such fonts on our project site, where I think we're up to 27 different scripts for rendering spoken and written languages, but I think we're at 67 different languages that are now represented in the site. That's an actual digression. I apologize, but still an interesting fact. And I'm gonna end there and turn it over to you, Howard, so we can get to some Q&A.
Aharon, that was absolutely terrific. Thank you for all that. I have a couple questions. I'm going to tell everybody that the chat is now open for your questions. I have a couple coming out of that presentation. Thank you, Aharon. Endlessly fascinating. I want to mention two things. Thank you for telling everybody how to contribute. And I like your definition of contributing, both prayers and money and in-kind contributions. That's very valuable. Also, I do want to mention one parenthetical. Rabbi Arnold Resnikoff is participating, is here today. You mentioned him. And Rabbi Resnikoff, I may point to you if you, I may force you to put a question in the chat. So everybody knows, I actually met Aharon through Rabbi Resnikoff, and he is well represented in Open Siddur through his many prayers in Congress and other places. So if you want, Rabbi Resnikoff, if you want to put a question directly, that would be great. As we wait for questions to come in, Aharon, I have a couple questions. First of all, do you have a prayer in the Open Siddur Project? Have you written a prayer?
I put together a Siddur back in 2016 for when my nephew's bar mitzvah was coming up. And that ended up being a draft for more complete Siddur for Friday night. And in that, I shared a piece that I had written for the Birkat Hamazon. There are prayers for a yontif, for a special festive day. And those are traditional prayers that one would say in the Birkat Hamazon. And then I thought it would be nice to have for civic days or patriotic days, it would also be nice to have an intention. And whether somebody wanted to use that or not, it would actually be sort of a prompt. And people could think about, just recognizing that at their feast, if they were having like Independence Day or Thanksgiving meal feast, or maybe they're in another country, it's Canada Day or Boxing Day, they could do something like that. Or it's the Shabbos before something like Martin Luther King Shabbos is a thing that happens in our world. So I put together a prayer for that, and I included that in the Siddur. That was somewhat unique there. I have a land acknowledgement I wrote, which I made for my chavurah here in Cincinnati. A lot of the land acknowledgements that have been written and shared among Jewish communities in Canada and in some parts of the United States over the last 10 years, they start saying that such and such lands that this service is taking place on is in unceded territory that somehow managed to become part of Canadian territory or territory of the United States. Here in Ohio, in southwestern Ohio, this was actually ceded territory. So I thought I'd make something, maybe it would become a model for how to think about how Jews could start thinking about indigeneity, not in regards to the Palestinian-Israel conflict, but think about indigeneity as Jews, as immigrants in this country, in this land, that we've benefited not necessarily by displacing or by destroying the culture of another group, like some of the earlier colonizing communities here in North America, but that we've benefited in other ways. And it's useful for us to think about that when we're thinking about ourselves in diaspora. So that exists on the project site. I think I might have contributed a few others. Most of my other contributions to the project site, when I'm wearing my translator or volunteer contributor hat, they're as translations. Most of that is in other European languages like German or quasi-Jewish European languages like Yiddish. Um, I have a few works that I've translated into Hebrew. Um, th those are fairly simple. So I don't want to put myself out as some like amazing uh, translator. There's some things I'm incredibly proud of that are translations that are just they've changed people's lives. Um, I recognize that people land in a different place when it comes to thinking about uh, transgender folk. Um, but I was a participant, or I led an initiative to translate a piece by Kalonymus ben Kalonymus, or Kalonymus bar Kalonymus, in 1322. It's part of an epic poem uh, Rabbi Kalonymus wrote called Evan Shohan. And there he writes in with incredible pathos what he would have been, what are his prayer for having been, if had he been, um, how do I say this? Kalonymus ben Bar Kalonymus writes about if he had been born a woman and not a man, and ends that prayer with with the blessing, thank God for making me a man and not a woman. Um, it's incredible. There's just incredible emotive poignancy and depth in this prayer. Um, and it was obscure. Some people knew about it. It hadn't been fully translated by anyone. And that was something we did. And since we've translated it, um, it's it's become much more well known. Every time I see that we have sort of a spike in our visitor log, it's usually because somebody's linked to it on Reddit.
Oh, that's so wow. Okay. So interesting. By the way, I say parenthetically, if everybody wants to see, Rabbi Reznikov has posted a historical footnote in the chat there regarding the picture that Aharon showed from the commissioning of the INS Eilat, first of three Israel Navy ships there, and he's linked to himself. So anybody go in the chat there. I have another question for you, Aharon. The so I take it that you don't have to be a rabbi to have a prayer in the open siddur, but likewise, is there a floor? Like, do you ever look at a prayer and say, "This is trash"? You know, this is nonsensical, and it's not. It just doesn't make the cut. Is there a cut? And have you rejected prayers just for being not good?
Yeah, I have. Um, it's probably one of the more important statements that I can make about the evolution of the project, because when I imagined it back in 2001, I thought, well, this is going to be uh, a very neutral project and a merit-driven project, and the um, the interest of any particular contributor is going to be based on their contribution. There won't be any gatekeeper for this project. Um, and that was very much related to our vision that there would be like this web application where people are going to use a bit of software based on the web to generate their own print-ready PDF of material that they selected and were able to edit and contribute and share and do all that stuff themselves. This Siddur making application, which was ultimately too ambitious for us, and um, till today. Um, we had people working on it, and they weren't able to reach that destination for our vision. They weren't able to reach it. And so what we are is this archive of material with a gatekeeper. That gatekeeper turns out to be our editor. I'm not the only editor for the project. I've just been the editor the longest. So it could be that whoever's the editor at any one moment might make a different decision. But it happened once. We got a contribution of a prayer and it just was too generic and it didn't have it was hard to make out that the prayer was Jewish by its content. It was maybe extremely secular. I could have imagined it would find use in a gift card in a store or on a birthday cake. And I don't want to poo-poo that. That's a genre. That's a genre of literature too. And sometimes phrases and statements that have their genesis on gift cards make their way into Jewish culture. There's this, you might remember this phrase that started becoming popular around 1970. Just don't walk ahead of me. I might not follow. Don't walk behind me. I might not lead. Just walk beside me and be my friend. Right? So that entered into Jewish culture through Jewish summer camps. And a phrase was added by a fellow Uncle Moishi, just walk beside me and be my friend, and together we will walk in the ways of Hashem. Okay? Pretty catchy. A nice tune to go along with it. And even more verses were added to it. So that's also in the Open Siddur Project. We weren't able to make a perfect attribution of the original lines, although I did a very, very long study of where that might originally have been written. I think it probably did come from a gift card or some kinds of greeting card, but it's also possible it came from a different source. It was like some people say in 1970 that thinking was in the air. But if you do a search for that on Open Siddur, in the descriptive text below the lyrics, there's an interesting history. And the contributors to the project also went through it and translated from English into Hebrew and from English into Arabic and from English into Yiddish. There might be a few other languages there. And it's a kind of for those Jews who grew up in a time where they went to Jewish summer camps or NCSY or another youth group where it might have been sung. It's a kind of formative song for the Jewish culture that we participate and maybe even continue to promote. So that's something I'm also proud of that piece. I enjoy doing historical research on prayers. That's another thing I discovered through this project that I had no clue that I had an interest in back when I conceived the project.
It just struck me, Aharon, you must be really intimidating to give a birthday card to. I can only imagine the struggles people go through to get you the card. I have another question. Is there a Christian equivalent to this project or a non-Jewish that you're aware of?
And when I went to present tense, they introduced me to a concept called an environmental scan. That's like when you do a startup, you do a sort of a literature review, and you find out competitors to your idea, comparative projects. That's the second C. Competitors, comparative. There's two other C's in there. But basically you want to know everybody who is within your world or should be on your radar, and then you can compare what you're doing. That's okay. So I was a little bit of ramble and I forgot your question, but it's totally related. So ask me it again so I can come back.
The question is, if you're a Christian, is there an equivalent, a Christian equivalent of Aharon Varady doing this work?
Thanks. So in that environmental review, I looked at other Jewish things. There were a few, that were in that realm. There is Ritual Well, which was conceived the same year, or a year after we conceived ours. That's a Jewish project that's part of the Reconstructionist movement, where it's actually native to RRC, the library in Amber, Philadelphia, just outside Philadelphia. And then in the Christian world, specific to your answer, there are these hymnaries. There are a number of projects which were doing hymn histories and collecting all the different books of hymns in which a particular hymn appeared. And by doing that kind of like historical review of hymns, in huge digital catalogs were being produced. One, like where was this hymn originally published, and then showing over time what the variations were to that. And I thought that was pretty wonderful. To do that for a text like the prayer for example, in Shemona Esrei, in the Amidah, there's a prayer thanking God who hears prayer. And there's two rather famous variations of it. There's the variation in Ashkenaz and the variation in Sepharad. Now, these are so old that we can't go back in history and point to a place that these were originally printed, or each of those variations, or if there was an ur text from which both were derived. This was before the printing press. And furthermore, if there is a work like the Talmud or some other text in the Geniza that's attesting to one of these variants, it's very difficult. We have these Siddur Rav Amram Gaon manuscript copies of one of the earliest prayer book collections, ostensibly from the 9th century CE. But the different attestations of this Siddur of Amram Gaon don't agree, which seems to suggest that in the different places in which Rav Amram Gaon's manuscript was copied, people scribbled in their own regional variation of that prayer. So we have a whole bunch of different manuscripts. So not like printed hymns from the 18th century on, but we have all these different works going back to maybe the 2nd century. But we can't be quite sure if those variations are attested from the 2nd century or simply attestations of the scribe in the region where they were copied much later on. And that's part of like the incredibly interesting, but sometimes not interesting history of Jewish prayer and Jewish liturgy. Like my thinking was, coming from a background only familiar with the Ashkenazi liturgical custom, I was very curious about what the variations were in other customs, what insights existed in other liturgical customs that I was completely ignorant of. What were Yemenite Jews saying? Yes, what were Sephardi Jews saying? But also, like, if there were variations of Ashkenazi prayers, there's variations in customs that are only kept by communities in Italy, because that one little community in Italy preserved a custom of Jews that had been expelled from France. And they're like the last community to have done things in this early French way from maybe before even Rashi. Um, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzhaki, the famous biblical commentator from the 11th century. So we have these insights, these deep, deep insights from different periods. And those insights exist as variations. And if we don't know them, if they're not attested anywhere, if we can't see them side by side, then we're blissfully ignorant, or in for people like me and people I want to help out, it's insights that that are now accessible.
All right, Aharon, we have 2 minutes left before Jerry gives us the hook. Jerry, I'm going to have one more question for Aharon, then I'll turn it back over to you. Or it might be slightly more of a comment, but it struck me during your presentation that you are speaking to the Jewish Study Center about your Jewish work, and your contribution is immense to the Jewish community and understanding. But this is also a technological marvel of what you've developed, and the development coincides with the online era and different systems this actually may not even be something that needs to be answered, but you are equally as interesting to the online technology. You mentioned Reddit. I mean, what you were doing has substance involving both camps, the Jewish camps and the tech community. I don't know. Would you see it that way by any chance?
I think if you're a techie, if you're a coder, and you look at our project, it might not seem so sophisticated. Or it might even seem quaint what we're doing here. But I think you're right. There are aspects of this project which I think are remarkable. Certainly, we couldn't even do much of this project from the time it was conceived until the time it was launched, because there was not a standard there was no standard for Hebrew having pointed text. So if somebody had a Hebrew word with points underneath, and you could, if you had that represented in a web page, more than likely it would show up as gibberish. So while the innovation that I see as remarkable, and then thank you, that you see as remarkable too, might be quaint to some people, it's something which didn't exist 20 years ago. It couldn't exist until a lot of people decided to contribute their capabilities and make it possible. And it's in that spirit that we're also contributing and making it possible. And our work is going to be the basis for, it's already been the basis of at least 10 other Siddurim that I know, some of which have been shared through the project site, have been reshared through the project site, including the first ever Siddur in a non-binary Hebrew, a new grammatical form of Hebrew that is being experimented with in practice by Jews who are not identifying according to a default male or a default female gender as Hebrew mandates, just by the nature of it being a gendered language. So people are trying to figure it out, and we helped to publish the first non-binary Hebrew Siddur, and I just think it's an amazing time for Jewish culture, working through these fraught and exciting challenges.
Perfect. Aharon, thank you so much. So wonderful. I urge everybody in our audience to consider contributing both prayers and money to the project. Thank you for joining us. Jerry Garfinkel, I'm going to throw it back to you to close this out. Aharon, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Aharon, and also Howard. It's an amazing, well, let me put this way, it's an amazing project, and you're an amazing person with all these interests, tech and Hebrew and Judaica and all these other aspects of it. uh, I think one could probably very easily get lost in such a project. There's so many different aspects of it. And then besides that, of course, you have other projects that are not really related to Open Siddur that your bio has. So I, I very much appreciate your giving the class. I learned something from it. I can't say I'm not a good learner. I could learn more if I was a better learner. You presented a lot of material. Um, so, as I said earlier, I will post the recording on YouTube and send an email out. And I'll put some information in the email on how to contact you, how to visit, access, excuse me, the Open Siddur Project, and anything else around that you think that you'd like to tell people. I can put onto the email that goes out with the location of the recording. So very much appreciate. This is Wednesday evening, and we'll have some more classes Wednesday evening. Next week, we're going to have the opening session of a class on women cantors. Rachel Edelstein is writing a book about women cantors, and she'll be telling us a lot about them, and a little more generally, perhaps she may talk about how the role of a cantor has been changing over the years. The week after that, Rachel will be interviewing two very prominent members of the Women's Cantors Network, including the lady who founded the Women's Cantors Network. There's so many women who are cantors now. They have their own network of about, I don't know, 120 people or so. So that's another interesting thing. And then a week from Sunday, on the 14th, we'd have a class about free will. Rabbi Jack Schlachter, who gave a class a few months ago about Oppenheimer versus Strauss. Strauss was the head of the AEC when Robert Oppenheimer was the head of the Manhattan Project, and Strauss and Oppenheimer didn't get along too well. Strauss basically made various moves to take away Oppenheimer's security clearance. So it was a big mess. And Jack talked about not the conflict completely, but the conflict in a Jewish vein, how the two of them, both Jewish, had a very different attitude about Judaism and how they self-identified. Jack was a physicist at Los Alamos National Laboratory, as well as being a rabbi. I think he's still a rabbi at Los Alamos, other places. So there's some very interesting classes coming up about the women cantors and about how free will plays out or doesn't play out.